Have you ever been asked to do something and you just kind of act like you didn't hear the person? Or maybe you just put it off, avoid, kind of just ignore them and hope that they won't keep bothering you. This is probably something that either we've all done or we've had done to us, right? When it's done to us, it's annoying. When we're doing it, we're hoping that it works. Generally, it doesn't. Usually, the person keeps nagging us, and eventually we give in anyway. The excuses don't work anymore. We get tired. Eventually we've got to do the thing that we're supposed to do in the first place, but just don't want to do. That's what I'm talking about. Not something that, we just don't want to do that someone's asking us. But if we know we're supposed to do it and then we just keep putting it off, eventually we usually give in and do the right thing. So why don't we just do it in the first place, right? Why do we go through this whole mess of making excuses, avoiding, acting like we don't hear, acting like we can't do it yet, all of those things whenever we're just going to do it anyway, right? Well, that is what happens in our story today. Today, our judge is a woman, but she's not actually the person that does the deliverance of the Israelites, but she has to prompt the one who does. God calls Barak, but he doesn't want to go. And so he kind of just ignores it, acts like it's not happening. And Deborah has to come alongside him and say, hey, didn't God tell you to do something? You need to go do it. And so we'll just go ahead and get right to the passage. This is Judges 1, and it says, when Ehud, the last judge, died, then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord again. And so the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, the king of Canaan. And so this was up in the north. There was a Jabin that we've heard of before back in Joshua when the people first came into the kingdom. If you remember, they fought all the southern tribes. And after they fought the southern tribes, Jabin, the king of Hazor, heard about this, and he gathered all the northern tribes together so that maybe if they fought them together, they would win. And then what ended up happening there is they didn't win, and then the Israelites ended up burning Hazor and just, demolishing the rest of the cities. But we assume this is the same area, but just not the same person. Jabin is probably, since this was many years before with Joshua, Jabin is probably the title of the king and not the king's name himself. And so this king in the north of the Canaanites has been allowed to oppress the Israelites because the Israelites have done evil in the sight of the Lord, which reminds us again why they should have defeated all the people in the land in the first place, right? They did kill that king at that time, and they did kill all of the people living there, and they burned the city, but the people scattered and they let them live in those places, and then they ended up going right back to their hometown and nobody bothered with them. And this is the problem of them not doing what God told them to do in the first place. And so it says he had a commander of the army whose name was Sisera, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord because Jabin had 900 iron chariots. So they were like, we can't do anything. God, please help us. And for 20 years, it says that they had harshly oppressed the Israelites. And then we hear about Deborah. So we know that they're being oppressed. And then there is this judge named Deborah. And Deborah as a judge here is more what we think of as a judge. It says she sits under the palm tree of Deborah, under her tree, and she makes judgments. People come to her and she, judges between their cases, gives them wisdom, helps them make decisions. And note that this is a woman. And back in that day, that was really rare. But apparently they really respected her because they came to her from miles around to hear her judgments. It also says that Deborah was a prophetess. And the name prophetess has only been given to 5 women in the Old Testament. So this was very rare for God to use a woman as a prophet, to speak through her to his people or allow her to speak to him on behalf of the people. That's what a prophet was, is kind of the mouthpiece for God and for the people, a go-between there. And Miriam was one of those prophetesses. She is the, sister of Moses. She was also called a prophetess. And then there were a few more, but this is very rare. But apparently people really respected her enough that when she sent for Barak all the way from Naphtali, her land was in the land of Ephraim, near Benjamin's land and near Judah's land. So in the south east of Ephraim's land is where she dwelt. And so she was close to those areas. Naphtali was in the north. That's where Barak lived. And she sent for him and he came, a man. So again, they must have all really respected her. And then this is what it says in verse 6. She says to Barak, "Has not the Lord of Israel commanded you, go and deploy troops at Mount Tabor? Take with you 10,000 men of the sons of Naphtali and Zebulun, and against you I will deploy Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariot and his multitude at the river Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hand. Hasn't God said this to you?" And Barak doesn't really answer. He doesn't say, yeah, God told me this, but I didn't want to go. But it's pretty much implied because his response is, I'll go if you'll go with me. If you're not going to come with me, though, I'm not going to go. So it's pretty apparent that God told him to do this, and he was just kind of acting like he didn't hear it. I don't care to go. I don't want to go, and I'm comfortable in my land here. And he seems perfectly willing to let the people continue to live in oppression to the Canaanites, right? He doesn't even seem concerned about it, because if it requires him doing something, he's not willing. But then when he gets called out, he's like, fine, I'll do it, but only if you come with me. So first, he's reluctant to even obey God in the first place. And second, he needs her support to even do it. God's presence with him isn't enough, because God's already told him, I'll make you victorious, but that isn't enough. He wants her presence. He needs somebody to hold his hand, right? He needs somebody to hold his hand. He's not going to do it otherwise. And providing that, she realizes he wasn't going to do it otherwise. She's like, fine, I'll go. But here's the catch. You won't get all the glory. If you don't want to take the responsibility for this battle, then you're not going to get all the glory for the battle. And so she says, this is verse 9. She says, nevertheless, there will be no glory for you in the journey that you are taking, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. So not only is he not going to be the one to kill the commander of the army, but it's not even going to be a soldier. It's going to be a woman that kills him. We find this out later. He doesn't know exactly how this is going to all play out, but she's saying the glory is going to go to someone else. And just to kind of add a little insult to injury, it's going to be a woman, So this tough guy, this guy that's supposed to be a leader, he's supposed to take charge. This is what men are supposed to do. They're supposed to be the ones that go to war, protect the women and the children. This is an 8 in God's people. And he won't do it without the prompting of a woman. He won't do it without the hand holding of a woman. And so she says, if that's the case, then a woman's also going to get the glory for this battle. And so it kind of, should have prompted him to do what he should do by kind of insulting him. It's kind of saying, someone that's supposed to not be doing these things that you're supposed to do for them instead, then they're going to do it. And so he goes, he takes the 10,000 troops from Zebulun and Naphtali as God has requested, and goes along with Deborah, and they go to the place that he says, Mount Tabor. This is where Issachar, Zebulun, and Naphtali all kind of meet. This is right on the border of all of these places. He says, I want you to go there and wait, and then I will call Sisera out to you, and y'all will meet at the river Kishon. And the river Kishon is on the southern border of what would be Issachar's land, Zebulun's land, and then Asher's land, and then flowing into the Mediterranean Sea. And so this would be south of Mount Tabor, where they're going to be having the actual battle. But God says, go to Mount Tabor, and I'm going to draw him out to you. And so they do. They go out to Mount Tabor, and he draws Sisera to them. Sisera hears that they're there, this army of Israelites. He gets his 900 chariots and all of his army, and he sets out to meet them. So then again, Deborah has to prompt Barak, and she says, hey, it's time for you to go. He is, on his way to meet you. You need to get up and go meet him too. And then she encourages him, and she says, God is going to go before you. Do not worry. Go ahead and go and fight these people. And so he does. He goes out to fight them. And we don't hear all of how God fights for them initially in this chapter, but in chapter 5, we'll get a little bit more details. But God drives them towards him, sends their horses into a panic, and they're fleeing what ends up being the flooding of the river. God floods the river. And like I say, we find that out here in a minute. And he floods the river and sends them into a panic. And the general, Sisera, hops off the back of one of the chariots and gets on foot and runs away and leaves his soldiers there to fight. The Israelites completely defeat the soldiers. And then in verse 11, it just kind of veers off for a second, and it tells us about this random man named Heber. And it says that he was a descendant of Moses' brother-in-law, and he would have been with the tribe of the Kenites, but he has separated from them, and he's living all the way on the east, right by the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee. And then it just kind of goes on with the story. So we're not exactly sure why he tells that, but we find out later that the reason they tell that story is because the general runs to his house. And it says he runs to his house because Heber has made peace with Jabin, the king. So he knows that this is a friendly place that he can run and get refuge from his enemy, or so he thinks. Well, Jael, his wife, she hears that she sees him coming. She knows who he is, and she says, hey, come in. I'll protect you. Come into the house. And so he comes into the house, and he says, hey, I'm thirsty. Can you give me some water to drink? She gives him a drink of milk, gives him a blanket, lets him lay down because he's tired. He's been running, from his enemies and been in battle. He's tired. She gives him a blanket, lays him down, and he says, hey, will you keep watch at the door? And if anyone comes, don't let them know I'm here. And she's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And so he goes and lays down. And then I want you to listen to what they say she does to him. This is verse 21. Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand. And she went softly to him, and she drove the peg into his temple. And it went down into the ground. She drove it completely through his head into the ground as he's laying on the ground. This is what this woman has done. So, warrior, she's got courage, right? For sure. She's got strength. She's probably done this before, putting the tent pegs in the ground, helping put the tent up. And so she has the strength to do this and the courage to go and do the thing that seemingly her husband wouldn't have done, because he ran to this house because the husband had made peace with the king. And so, sometimes the men know what they're supposed to do. Sometimes us women know what we're supposed to do, but we don't do it. And in this story, the men know what they're supposed to do, but they either don't do it without the prompting of a woman, or they don't do it at all because, they don't want to. They don't want to do the hard thing, the uncomfortable thing. And Jael seems to realize we should have never made peace with this king in the first place. And I need to take charge of this situation, do what is right here. And so both of these women have taken initiative where the men are sitting by passively, right? They're not taking charge. They're not leading. They're not doing the things that they need to do. They're not being soldiers without extreme prompting. And so, when the leaders don't rise up, God will rise up another. When he calls you and you don't go, he will raise another. And that's what he's done here. In their culture, and even innately in God's way, the men protect the women. The men are supposed to be the leaders, but they're not doing it. And the women are perfectly capable. It's not that women aren't, but women generally have different roles. They're the caretakers instead of the protectors, they're the supporters of their husbands, not the leaders. That's how God set it up. He said, whenever he made Eve, he said, I should make a helper suitable for Adam, because I have these tasks that I'm asking Adam to do, and I want to make a helper for him. And so we're really not supposed to be the leaders. We're supposed to be supporting them. But, sometimes it falls into kind of leadership. I mean, she's taken him by the hand. He does it, but she's taken him by the hand. And then again, like I say, women are normally caretakers, not protectors in that same sense. But her husband has made peace with the king. And so she's like, I got this. I'm going to take care of it. And she's the one that kills the general. So very interesting. And then, Barak comes looking for him. He's been chasing after Sisera, and turns out that Jael meets him, and she says, I know who you're looking for. Come here. He's right here. And she lets him into her tent, and there he is, dead, the general. She's killed him. Now, after this, Barak and Deborah, it says, sing a victory song. And that is what the chapter 5 is all about. And I'm not going to read it all to you. I'm going to kind of summarize it. If you get the study, or if you have your Bible and you want to look at it, it's a poetic song. And so some of the things are a little difficult to decipher. So I'm going to kind of go through it, but I'm not going to read every line, and just kind of explain it to you. And so verse 2 says, when leaders lead in Israel, when people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. And that's not exactly what it says. In their poetic way, what the literal translation of that is that when the long-haired men let their hair down, let loose their hair. That's the literal phrase. And that's just their poetic way of saying when the leaders lead, because the hair was supposed to be a sign of strength. Somebody that has healthy long hair looks like they're strong and healthy, right? And so this was a sign of strength. And it says when they let loose their hair, when they let loose their strength, they defeated these people. That's what it's kind of saying in just a poetic way. And then they bless the Lord, and they go through and talk about how the heavens poured, the clouds poured water. So that's how we know that God was fighting on their behalf. God flooded the rivers, sent the chariots on the run. And then it says the mountains gushed before God. So the rivers are flowing high. And then it talks about, it says, in the days of Shamir and in the days of Jael, the highways were deserted and the travelers walked along the byways. And so what he's saying is that we couldn't live in safety. When you don't feel comfortable going out and walking on the road, right? And that's what he's kind of saying. Remember, Shammer was the one who defeated the Philistines with the ox goad. And so he's saying, we've had two people now in a row that were either the Philistines on the west coast or the Canaanites in the north that are living within our land that are oppressing us. And when they live right here and they're oppressing us, our normal way of life has been stunted. We haven't gotten to live normally, have a good life for a long time. And then it says, but then Deborah arose as a mother of Israel. So as a caregiver, as someone that is going to take care of the situation, Deborah arose to care for the people. She judged the people. She gave them wisdom, helped them with their decisions, and ultimately is the one who got Barak to do the thing that needed to be done to free the Israelites. And so it kind of praises her, and then it praises the soldiers and says they stepped up and they did what they needed to do. And now we have defeated all of these people. It says, my heart is with the rulers of Israel because they were willing to do this, go and fight for them. And then it talks about God again, and it talks about how he has taken control. He's done all of these things for them and given them this victory. And then it praises the tribes that have joined in this battle. It sounds like it was just Nebulun and Naphtali, because he said get 10,000 troops from them. But apparently, I told you that Deborah was in the land of Ephraim, and that was very close to Benjamin's land. Well, apparently those people traveled north with them. When Barak and Deborah traveled north, then the two tribes, men from those two tribes, traveled north with them. Also, this battle happened in Issachar's land. And so Issachar's men also dwelt with them. And so it praises all of those people. But then it calls out two tribes on the eastern side on the western side of the Jordan, and all the tribes on the eastern side of the Jordan. The eastern side didn't even mess with it, even though it was in the north, very close to Manasseh and Gad's land. They didn't bother to do anything with their brothers on the western side. And then even though Asher was right there, right next to the land of Zebulun, they didn't fight. Dan was as close to Hazor, the king of Jabin, as any of the rest of these people, and even closer than Ephraim and Benjamin were. And yet he didn't go out, the tribe of Dan. And so they call those people out. The only people they don't call out is Simeon and Judah, because they were too far south. Remember, they're the ones that have the Negev down there. And they've got the whole southern portion, and then everybody else has the whole northern portion. And so it wouldn't make sense for them to go up into the land. It's kind of divided like that, north and south. And so they don't go up. And then the other people that don't go is the Levites, because they're not in service to the people through the army. They're in service to the Lord through, their ministry. And so the Levites never do fight. So they don't call them out. And then after that, they talk about how God, fought for them and made the horses gallop so fast away from the flood and all of that. And then it turns to Jael. And it gets even more graphic when it talks about Jael. First of all, it says that Sisera asks for water, yet she gives him milk. And it kind of gives the indication, he's asking for water to quench his thirst, and milk is not satiating. We know that milk doesn't really quench your thirst, not like water does. It kind of even makes you more thirsty. It's almost like food as opposed to a drink, even though it's wet. And so that's kind of her way of saying, I'm not giving you what you want, and I'm actually going to kind of give you the opposite of what you want. But he doesn't seem to catch it, but they talk about that in this song. And then in verse 26, it says, she stretched her hand to the tent peg, her right hand to the workman's hammer. She pounded Sisera. She pierced his head. She split and struck through his temple. At her feet he sank. He fell. He lay still. At her feet he sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead. So very graphic, right? Pounded his head, crushed his skull, basically, one of the versions says. And so it's praising her, obviously, and telling how she did this. And then the rest of the song is kind of sad, but they're happy about it because these people are bad people. They've oppressed them for all this time. But the end of it talks about Sisera's mom. And listen to what it says. This is verse 28. The mother of Sisera looked through the window, and she cried out through the lattice, "Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarries the clatter of his chariots?" Her wisest ladies answered her, "Yes." She answered herself, "Are they not finding and dividing the spoils? To every man a girl or two?" For Sisera plundered of garments embroidered and dyed, 2 pieces of dyed embroidery for the neck of the looters. And so she is, saying, why is it taking them so long to come back? Maybe he's dividing the spoils. Maybe he's dividing the women that they're going to take captive, maybe 1 or 2 each. Maybe they're going to get these beautiful clothes. Maybe the Israelites have a lot of stuff. And so that is why he is taking so long. And then obviously that's not the case because her son chose the wrong enemy. And now he is defeated. He's not coming home. And the last part of the song says, "Thus all your enemies perish, O Lord, but let the ones that love you be like the sun when it comes out in full strength." So he says, strengthen our allies and defeat our enemies. That's what we're asking in the song. We praise you for, this victory. And then the song is over. And then it says everyone went back to their own lands and they had peace for 40 years.